Welcome back to Drawing One, everybody. So for this video, I'm going to be teaching you probably the most important thing that I can teach you. And so in this video, what we're going to be talking about and discussing is sighting and angle sighting. If you're unfamiliar with that, you might have seen examples of it. If you ever saw old cartoons where, someone's drawing something and they hold their thumb out at arm's length and kind of gauge it with one eye, that's what sighting is. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be teaching you in this video. And what's interesting about it is that it's a very easy way to go about creating very accurate proportions within your drawing. And then once again, it's just something that can help us create a much more realistic drawing as we're drawing from life. So what you can see is I've got three objects over here on the side, two spray bottles and a can of spray fixative, and I'm going to be trying to draw them on my pad of paper here. So I'm going to try to do this as quickly as possible. I do ask you to forgive me if the video length is a little on the longer side, but I encourage you to watch it all the way to the end because I'll be talking about different tricks and tips and things that will help you out along the way. Once again, I can't stress it enough. This is probably the most important thing that I can teach you as it regards to drawing from life, okay? So once again, I've got my three objects over here. I've got two spray bottles and a spray can. And I've got my pad of paper, drawing paper attached to my board. I've got it set up on my easel because to really do this accurately, I want to be drawing in an upright vertical position, because if I'm drawing with the paper down like this, well, then all of my perspective and my proportions get skewed because I'm not looking at the drawing in the same way that I'm looking at the object. So I want to be drawing vertically. All right. Now the other thing I've got, you can see I've got my maul stick. I'll probably be using this a little bit more towards the end. But for starters, I'm going to be using my full arm. Now, the other thing that I would recommend for you guys is, right now I'm drawing in a sitting position. However, you guys might try standing as well. It gives you more broad, kind of range of movement with your arm and everything like that. And you can sit if you want. It's just, I've always found that when we're beginning to learn this process, it's easier if you're standing. And once again, having an easel or something that you can prop your drawing pad up against, like on a table or something, can be advantageous for you. Now, aside from that, I've also got just my 2B pencil. I'm going to be doing the majority of this in 2B. I do have my 4B and my 6B pencil here as well, and I'll be showing you, a little bit toward the end what we can do with this as well. But I've also got my pencil eraser and my pencil sharpener. Okay, so the other thing that's important to note in this process is that it's all right to make mistakes in it. Okay, that's why we have erasers. But that being said, we want to start very lightly. We don't want to sit there and make a really, heavy dark mark. We want to start off with a very light kind of mark that's, just kind of barely there. So in the beginning, it might be a little hard to see what I'm doing, but just trust that, you'll start to see it as it fills in some more. Now, that being said, once again, we want to work from a very light line to a darker line, because the lighter the lighter the line is that we make, the easier it is to erase, versus say if I push down and drag across, well, not only do I have a really thick line that's harder to erase, I've also just indented my paper and that line will pretty much always be there. So we want to start lightly and work our way up to dark, all right? And gradually adding more and more pressure as we go, as we begin to refine the line work. Now, the other main takeaway from this is going to be to start very simply and work your way up to specific details, okay? So we don't want to start off with little bitty minute detaily things. We want to start off with broad, big picture kinds of elements. So we want to think about basic lines, basic shapes, basic angles, And then we can begin to refine those basic shapes, lines, and angles and finesse them into what they're supposed to look like based on what we're looking at. So once again, we want to start from light and go to dark, and we want to start from simple and go to complex, okay? So this is the main thing. I cannot stress these things enough. Start lightly, work your way to dark. Start simply and work your way to complex. I cannot ram that home any further. I mean, you'll hear me say it time and time again, okay? So once again, light to dark, simple to complex, all right? Now to begin this, what I also want to do is I want to make sure that my objects that I'm drawing are a little ways away from me so that I can hold my hand out in full, outstretched, so my arm is fully outstretched here from my perception. So I want to be able to hold my whole arm out straight in order to do this. And that's because I'm going to be using my pencil to measure my objects from my perspective and from my vantage here, okay? So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to make a couple of general tick marks because I don't want to draw my three objects there really tiny in the middle of the page here. I want to take up the majority of the page, or at least a good amount of it, okay? So I'm going to try to take up the majority of the middle of the page, and that's what I want you guys to do. So to start off with, I can come down and I'm going to make two tick marks, one at the top and one at the bottom, and then between those tick marks, I know that I want all of my objects to fall within that height. So let's say my top mark is there, and I want my bottom mark there. So all of my elements need to fit between these two marks that I just made, at least height-wise. Now, based on that, I'm going to come over here, I'm going to hold my pencil out at arm length, and I'm going to align the top edge of my pencil to the very top edge of my object, and that's going to correspond to this mark that I made on the top, okay? Now from there, I'm going to then slide my thumb up the base until it's aligned with the bottom edge of my objects there, at least in my perception, okay? So generally speaking, from my perception, my objects are about yay tall. Now, I can imagine that this length here is going to be the same as the length between my two marks that I just made, okay? So from there, what I want to do is I want to measure, based off of this length, from my perception, how wide my objects are going to be. So I can come over here, and I can flip my pencil over, and I'm going to align my thumb to the right edge of my objects, and then I'm going to make a kind of distinction, or at least look, roughly speaking, where my objects end at. So I know that they're going to be about that wide between my two thumbs there. All right. Now from that, I can say, well, that's about 3/4 of the way. So it's going to be about 3/4 as wide as it is tall. So from that, in that sense, I can come over and I can say that, my objects need to be about that wide. So I can take that and I can measure it off with something a little bigger. So I'm going to use my maul stick in this case. And now I know that my objects need to be between the edge of my thumb here and the edge of my stick here. So now I know that all of my objects need to fall between these 4 marks, okay? So I've got one up top, one at bottom, one on the left, and one on the right. So all of my objects need to fit within this space, okay? This general space. Now, from there, what I can do is start to make more kind of simple shapes. So once again, I want to start blocking in my shapes based on how I see them. And to do that, I'm also going to take a couple more measurements. So for instance, my spray bottle that's on the bottom, that's lying down, I know that generally speaking, it needs to fall within these marks here. Okay, so I can make kind of a general shape between these. Now, I also want to measure the height of that object. So what I'm going to do is, once again, I'm going to line my thumb to the bottom edge of the spray bottle. And now in this case, I'm actually looking at the bottom edge being where the sprayer is in my perception. And I'm going to put the tip of my pencil at the top of the actual bottle itself, because that's the highest point and the tip of the nozzle is the lowest point. So I can see in my perception that it needs to be roughly that tall. Now I can measure that against another element within this, so I know roughly how tall it needs to be. So let's measure it against the width here. So I can, in this sense, I'm going to align my thumb to the edge on the right side here, and then I'm going to make a mental note of where the tip of the pencil lead hits. So 2. Okay, so I know that the width or the height of this object is about 2 of the length. So I know that it needs to be as high this way as it is twice this way. So from that sense, I can say, well, roughly halfway speaking would be something about like that. So, well, roughly speaking, that object needs to fall within this kind of rectangle, okay? Now from there, what I want to do is I want to measure my next major element, okay? So the next element that I'm going to do is the can, the spray can that's on the right side here, because I know that its edge is roughly the same as this guy. It does cut in just a little bit, but I can also make a measurement off of that. So this time I'm going to align my thumb once again in my perception to the bottom edge of my square here, or my rectangle, which is going to be the main body of my spray bottle that's lying down. And then I'm going to align the edge, or the top edge of my pencil lead, to the top of that spray can. So we've got something roughly like that. Now what I want to do is measure that against the actual, kind of height there. So I want it to come, and let's measure it against the top part. So it's roughly a third of, so the top of the spray bottle that's going to be up here is about a third of the distance between here and here, roughly speaking. So from here, I want that object to come up to about right there. And then let's check that. So from there, I'm going to measure between the top edge of my spray can and the top edge of my spray bottle there, just to make sure that I'm as accurate as I can be. And so now I'm going to compare that once again to, say, the height of my, rectangle that I made down here. And I can see that it's almost as tall. It's just barely shorter. So then I can say, well, roughly speaking, it's about yay big. So I can take that and I can come down and say, okay, well, that mark needs to go down just a little bit more, okay? So once again, I'm making very simple measurements based on the relationship between my objects, and I'm starting off by making simple tick marks, okay? Now the other thing I want to do here is come in and make a few general marks for where this shape is going to be. So, and now I want to measure the width of this as well. So once again, I'm going to put my thumb at my perception to the edge of the can there, and then put the point of my pencil on the opposite edge. And so I've got something roughly like that. Now what I want to do is once again measure it accordingly to something. And so the can this way is about the same size as this is this way. So I can take that same measurement. So I can put my pencil lead at the top here, and then I know that my thumb is at the bottom edge, so I can come over and I can say, well, roughly speaking, that object needs to fall within this space, okay? Now, once again, I'm starting very, very simply, and these are simple objects to begin with, but now I want to also make a kind of object for this other guy. So what I'm gonna do there is I can see that this other bottle doesn't come all the way over to the left-hand edge there. So I can measure once again. This time I'm gonna start by putting my thumb on the edge of the can here in the center of the composition and align the edge of my pencil to the opposite side over here. So I've got something roughly like that. Now I want to measure that to the size of my deal here. And once again, it's roughly halfway speaking. So I want to go roughly halfway, which pretty accurate because it puts me just before the edge, because the spray bottle down here is going to stick out just a little further than the edge that's going to be on this side, which is good. So from there, what I can say is that the back edge of this guy is going to come just behind here. Now there's going to be kind of an angle that happens, but I know that the it's going to fall kind of behind there. So then I can come over and I can say, well, that object needs to fall within this square, okay? Now, let's start getting a little bit more complicated. So once again, I'm going to make some tick marks here, but these tick marks I'm going to use now more as an anchor point to start making my more refined kind of angular lines. So let's start with our main shape here. Now in the spray bottle, I can see that the spray head lines up basically right with this line. So I can actually just extend that line over, and now I know that the actual like spray tip with the trigger thingy needs to fall within this rectangle up top here, and then the rest of the spray bottle needs to fall within this realm. Okay, now likewise I can come over here and I want to measure down from the top of my spray can lid to see where the cap stops. So once again, I'm going to put the tip of my pencil up to that line in my actual objects, and then I'm going to align my thumb to the bottom edge of it, and then I want to measure against something. So in this case, I'm going to measure against the spray head, because the cap on the can is about the same height as the spray head is going to be. So I can take that measurement and I can just hold my fingers over, and then I can make a kind of mark there. And once again, now I know where the spray head is and the cap for the can is. Now likewise, now I'm not going to try to be too detailed in terms of drawing in all of the lettering and things on the different spray bottles, but I do want to make some other delineations for like the black mark and things like that, because those major areas will also help to give me focal points on which to anchor my other lines. So in this case, I'm going to once again align the top edge to the bottom there, and then my thumb to the bottom edge of it, and then I want to compare that. And so you know, we can also come in and say, well, you know, there's a bit of the, we can see a bit of the top, so I want to delineate that. And then I know that that needs to fall in that range as well, okay? Now this is gonna alter a little bit because my spray bottle down here is actually gonna be at an angle and it's somewhat transparent, so I'm gonna extend these lines down just a little bit, all right? Now, what I wanna do from there is I also want to make some marks within these other elements to let me know where some of these major things are going to be. So in this case, I'm going to jump back over to this guy and I'm going to measure from the bottom edge down here up to the point where the neck of the spray bottle starts to kind of taper in, where we would hold it by, you know. So once again, I'm going to put my thumb at the bottom edge here on my objects, and I'm going to align the top edge to the corner roughly here where that's going to start to cut in. Now I want to measure against something. I can see it's just barely larger than my spray can here. So we're going to put just a little bitty bit over, and we're going to come up and say, you know, from the bottom, well, from this mark, it needs to be somewhere in that range. Now, once again, this is a mark that's going to get erased here in a while, but it's going to serve to tell me where I need to start doing some of my major angle work as well, okay? Now, from there, I want to make a few delineations within this shape as well, mainly for where the main body of the bottle is versus the spray nozzle. So I'm going to, once again, align my thumb to the edge of my object over here, and then put the pencil tip at the place where the nozzle screws on, okay? Now I want to measure that against something, and I can see it's just roughly bigger than that. So we're gonna go somewhere right in here, but I want to check that again. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold my pencil up to where I perceive the line of the screw cap on this bottle is, but I'm going to see where it lines up to something else above it. And so I can see it needs to be roughly halfway in between here. So we need to go just over just a little bit. So once again, I know that this mark is going to be where the spray bottle and the bottle, or like the sprayer and the bottle itself, come together, okay? Now from that, I also want to, so we're gonna make that delineation, okay? Now we're going to start getting much more complicated, okay? And once again, this is very basic and it's very rudimentary, and I can already tell just from looking at it that it's going to need to alter slightly, but we're going to be able to see how it needs to alter a little bit more here in just a minute. Now, the other thing I want to do is I've noticed that the spray cap does not extend all the way to this line. So I want to see about how far over it needs to come. And now I want to compare that to something. So I know that the edge of the spray cap, or the sprayer where the nozzle is, needs to come to basically that line. And yeah, I made that line a little too dark, so I want to erase it and just kind of a light line. And once again, you can see I'm doing this very lightly. Hopefully you can see, but I'm also not being super well refined at the moment either, because I'm going to save that for the end. Now I want to do the same thing I did there with the edge of the spray bottle on this side as well. So then I can make a measurement, and once again I can compare that. and it needs to come in about the same amount. And in that case, I'm just kind of eyeballing it because once again, we're going to refine it some more here in a minute. Now, from there, I also want to make, a delineation for the width of the actual screw top. So it's going to be about the same. So I know that it needs to come up to about that line. And everything else is going to fall within that as well. Now from there, what I also want to do is make a line for where, the bottle kind of comes down and bends, and there's like an edge here and then an edge that recedes. So I want to make a line to kind of indicate where that corner is going to be. And it's a little hard to see in the bottle itself, but I'm going to make a mark. And once again, I'm measuring from the tip of my pencil on the edge here and putting my thumb where I see that mark in my perception. Now I'm going to measure that. And it's just barely shy of that. So then I know that that element needs to come in right about there, okay? So vice versa, let's also do the spray nozzle just to give us an idea of that as well. And it's going to be about that same distance. So we're going to make a mark like that, okay? Now from there, what I want to do is start making some other kinds of marks. The main one I want to do a center mark that cuts roughly through the center there, and I know that it needs to cut right through where my the nozzle connects in. So that's basically my center mark, and from there I want it to come all the way over. And then I want to start making some basic angular kinds of marks. And these angle marks are going to allow me to see which major ways these elements are really facing. And for this, what I want to do is I want to hold my pencil edge up to the angles that I see. And then I want to once again, I'm holding my arm at arm's length, and in my perception, I'm holding my pencil to the general angle of the object that I see. Now, what I want to do is keep my arm very steady and come over here and make a mark, okay? So now I know that the head of this spray bottle needs to follow that general angle if I'm cutting right down the center of it, okay? And that connects to my corner down here because that's the very edge of my composition and everything like that. Now what I also want to do is make the angle for the actual plunger or the trigger thingy on the sprayer itself. So once again, I'm going to come over and I'm going to make a general kind of angle, and I want it to hit something like that. Now, once again, I could sit there and make some measurements based on the height of everything and just to see. So if I'm basing it off of that measurement, okay, we're about right in terms of the height there. Now, obviously, this is just a general angle, and I'm going to start, building around that angle. But this angle allows me to maintain the kind of basic shape that I see, okay? So aside from that, what I also want to do is realize that the top of this guy comes about to there, but I've also got a kind of general angle that comes down off of that as it comes into the body of the bottle itself. And so I'm going to kind of go around and make a few of these kind of angles. Now, these subtle angles are what's going to help me to finesse this kind of curve out of these elements. Now, the other thing I can see is that as it curves down, we also have where it kind of curves into a flat area there, and then it recurves back at the back. So once again, in this sense, we have a very simple kind of trapezoid shape that I've made right here, and that's going to inform that area where the bottle curves around. Now likewise, I want to come over and say I'm going to measure the distance between the where the cap kind of starts and where it ends, and I'm going to measure that against something else. So we basically the cap needs to be roughly the same as the distance between the spray cans. So we can come down here and then I can say, once again, it needs to come to about right there. So we're pretty on key. But we also, I want to measure the distance here between the stock of the cap before it comes into the actual sprayer itself. So I'm going to make that measurement. I'm going to say it needs to be roughly that. So I can make another tick mark there. Okay, now I know that the sprayer and the trigger itself need to fall within this range, and the kind of thing coming into the bottle needs to fall within this range, and then the bottle itself is there. Okay, so let's do the same thing, but this time up here on our actual spray bottle, or our big spray bottle. Excuse me. So what I want to do is I'm aligning the edge of my pencil in my perception at arm's length to the angle of the top of the sprayer there. And I want to come over and I want to make a mark. Now what I want to do is I also want to make a measurement from the tip over here to the point where it starts to come downward. And I'm going to compare that. So, need something about like that. So I know that that angle needs to go to there, and then I can come back and I can make that angle there. Now what I also want to do is figure out where the plunger is going to come into play. So I want to see where that starts. Once again, I'm making measurements based off of other measurements that I can see. So that guy needs to start roughly there. But this needs to be a little shorter and everything. So let's also okay, so I've got the back side there. Now I'm going to make a measurement on where this actually screws into the bottle, and then that will give me where the back side of the trigger comes in, and also where the main angles here are going to come into play. So once again, I'm aligning my thumb up to this line that I just made, and I'm putting the pencil edge on the opposite side. I'm going to compare that. I want it to be roughly the same. So something kind of like that. Now I also want to say that this guy comes almost halfway, but not quite. And then I'm going to make that mark. that mark, that mark, that mark. I'm going to make another mark. So I know I'm going to see just a bit of the top there. And I'm also going to make a mark like that. Now what I want to do is make a general kind of angle for that guy. And we're going to try to follow it. But we also want it to come just beneath where the actual cap thing is there, but not all the way down. Now what I want to do is I can also see two major angles in this guy before he curves down, and we have something kind of like that. Now once again, this is very, very rough, and we're going to refine it here in a few minutes. But generally speaking, we have a nice kind of starting point. Now from there, I can see two major angles that come off of this guy. And then a third in the bottle that cuts down. So I can make general angles such as that. Now the other thing is I'm going to come off here just a bit, and this guy is going to descend off of basically the corner there. And then it comes to roughly this corner. So from there, it comes down something like that. Now I also want to account for this guy here as well as this structure. So I'm also going to make a kind of general guy there. A general guy there. There. Well, it kind of folds into that guy. Now what I also want to do is realize that this guy comes around somewhat too. And most of this is going to be a kind of line that we don't really see a whole lot of, but we kind of know it's there as well. And once again, we have something kind of like that as well. All right. So from there, we can also, let's make a mark for where the actual liquid is within this. And some of this I'm kind of eyeballing just right now because we're going to change it up quite a bit here in a minute anyway. So there's that. Now we have a basic shape. Once again, very, very basic kind of shape of the main spray bottle there. Now the can itself, this is the delineation for my lid, and I want that to come out just a little bit more because of the lip on the can lid. And then I can also, come up and I can say, I'm going to make a few kind of general angly things for the top of the lid that I can see there, etc. And I'm also going to make a little bit of an angle here and there to indicate how this form rounds around the can and everything like that. So once again, so I want that lip to kind of be curved as well. And once again, we're going to refine this somewhat more here in a few minutes. All right, so bear with me. All right, so now let's come back down here to our can guy, and now I can see that that guy goes through there and basically terminates something like that. Now, you know, this is going to be somewhat transparent, so I'm going to try to place a few of those elements here and there just so that we can see them better. Now, the other thing I want to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to refine my general angles a little bit more here and there. Now I want this guy to be fairly straight, and I want that one to be fairly straight as well. And for some of these, like these curve guys, like especially these kind of really subtle curves, like on, you know, glasses and dishware, anything like that, it's really easy to just kind of make a general mark, but then it doesn't really look all that good. So what I like to do is I kind of like to change my angle up as many times as I kind of see it. So you kind of have to generalize as you're looking at your subject a little bit, and you know, kind of and think about how we could, you know, angularize any of these kinds of simple forms and things. All right, so now what I want to do is I also want to add just a little bit here and there. And I want to make a measurement of this guy in terms of its height. And I want to compare that to its width. So it's about the same height as it is, you know, lengthwise. So we want something kind of like that. In fact, you can already see I'm making some mistakes already. So considering that, basically this guy either needs to be a little taller, so we're going to make him just a little taller there, but we're also going to make this guy just a little shorter as well, just so it looks more accurate. So something else too, if you're making a lot of changes, you can see I've got quite a few, you know, kind of loose marks here and there. If it gets confusing for you, you know, you can erase them and whatnot. I usually don't like to erase a whole lot of these marks right off the bat until I start refining it, because it allows, or it at least helps me to see, you know, where I might have made a mistake, or, you know, vice versa, and everything like that. Now, from there, I also want to come roughly the same distance. Now, in this case, we've got kind of a taper effect there. However, it's also going to taper out more extremely toward the bottom, and we've got a kind of element there that juts out somewhat. And once again, we're going to refine this even more as we go. So all right, now let's fix that guy. All right, so there's that. Now, the other thing to remember as you're doing this is that anytime you move too far one way or the other, your perspective is going to change. So you want to try to stay within the same kind of area so that you're not losing sight of things or you're not shifting your perspective and therefore everything starts to look weird or different or what have you. Okay? So now the next thing I want to do is I want to do the bottom edge of the sprayer itself that connects into this guy. Now I have my general angle here, but I want to follow once again the actual angle that I see. And I want to extend it all the way down, because if it comes down to a point, then I can just kind of taper part of that off here in a few minutes, and it's no big deal. So then I know from there I'm going to align my pencil to the top edge, which I know needs to come out to that guy, and then I can go from there and say, well, that needs to come there. And I got a guy that comes off like that. And like that. And so once again, something else about doing these angles, this can help you really finesse off a really, kind of vague or shallow type of angle there. So if you got something that's really subtle, this can really help you out and make it a little easier. And we want that guy to come into there. So once again, we know that now this is the top edge of that guy, so we can kind of erase a few of those excess marks. I'm going to extend that guy down just a little bit. But now let's do bottom edge. Okay, so that needs to stop at that line. All right, now let's do the spray cap itself. So once again, we want it to kind of follow this line, but it's also going to stand out just a little bit more. And we want it to occupy that kind of space. And see, this is where if I was doing this standing, I wouldn't have to be bent over. Normally, I would also move my easel up and down to be able to get the things easier, but I don't want you guys' perspective of this to change all that much, so that you can actually kind of see what I'm doing. So this guy's going to come out just a little bit extra. And the angle over here is going to shift some. Now, so now I know that the spray cap needs to fall in that. Got a little guy there. Something like that. We can also see that this guy comes in, something like that, and then we got something. Okay, so we actually need to make this guy a lot thicker. And once again, this is back and forth. It's always a little bit of back and forth there. So from there, Okay. And that. And there we go. Okay. Now from there, once again, I want to check a couple of things. And make a few kind of adjustments. Okay, now the other thing, we want to pay attention to small little detail-y kinds of things too. So, you know, we got little guys here and there. And we need another little angle up top there. Okay, and then from there, get another. Thing like that. Now the other thing I want to make sure that I don't forget is the tip of the spray bottle down there. And let's do a couple little refining things here and there as well before we start to go too much further. Now the other thing, and you might have seen me do this in one of the other videos, you know, let's say, because there's a circle inside of the square of the spray nozzle up here, okay? So what I can do to make that square, or that circle, I can subdivide the square, you know, roughly in half. And I want to try to follow the angles that I've already established. And then I can kind of connect the dots there. And once again, I'm being very light and very kind of sketchy in how I'm doing that, but that's going to allow me to refine it a little bit better here in a little bit. So let's also, I've got a general kind of shape on this guy. Let's also do a little refining on him as well. Okay. Now, this guy. Needs to be a little shorter as well. Okay, so from there, what I can do now is I'm going to come in, and I also want to look at a few little places here and there. I'm going to make a few extra measurements. Yep. Just to make sure all my proportions are right. few of these things are kind of weird. They always look a little weird right off the bat. So don't fret too much. I can see the bottle coming down here. And all right, so I've got a pretty decent kind of breakdown. Let me make a few more measurements really quick. Yep. I'm going to make just a few kind of adjustments to make it look a little bit more accurate here and there. Okay, now the other thing. This guy. Yeah. Oh, we're gonna drop him just a little bit more too. Going to extend him this way just a little bit because looking at it, it looks a little too fat and not quite long enough based on what I'm looking at in front of me. So once again, this is the stage to go through and make all of these kind of basic, changes and things like that. Now, also going to make a few indications here and there of like my labels and things. So that guy needs to come in like that. Once again, I'm going to be doing kind of general angles and what have you, and then we'll finesse this here in a few minutes. All right, so from there, I also can see that I've got a major kind of thing coming like this, and something kind of like that. And that's, once again, that's stuff that's reflecting through here. Now, I'm not going to do everything in this, but we'll get the basic idea of everything. Okay, so looking around, I also, I can see a few little reflection thingies and my transparency on that. I'm just going to make some indications of them for right now. The other thing, I'm going to make a few indications of these kinds of thingies. I'm not going to do everything, but generally speaking, that kind of comes back into, there we go. So I think now what we're ready to do is start refining our edges and everything. Now this is probably going to take me a little bit longer to do, or not quite longer I should say, but I want to try to be more careful when I'm doing this. So once again, everything that we've done up to this point has been very general, you know, lines, shapes, angles, things like that. But we have everything pretty well proportioned. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch from my 2B over to my 4B pencil, and I'm going to start refining some of this line work. And so you'll also get to see me use the maul stick, so you can see how I would go about using that. All right, so I am also going to get a little bit closer to it as well, just for the sake of what I'm doing, and I'm also going to drop just a bit. So I apologize if I block this somewhat as I go, but I will, try to kind of show you here and there some of the things that I'm doing. All right. So let's start with the top guy here. Let's start with that spray bottle. And in this sense, I'm just going to kind of go in and start making some darker marks here and there. Now, once again, I want to be very careful. I want to try to follow like my line work and whatnot. And you can see I kind of do this in a little bit of a sketchy manner, especially on curves, because I found that, you know, if we do this a little bit in a kind of sketchy manner, then it gives us more line choices to work from, and everything like that. So we can be a little bit more selective in what we're doing. So from there, do something like that. Something like that. So once again, you can see I'm using those angles, the basic angles that I've made, to help influence the curves that I want to make as well. Okay, so let's come back up over here. And let's see, still making some mistakes here and there, but that's all right. You know, that's what our eraser's for. And so hopefully you can see how I'm using the maul stick here, and that it's acting as a hand rest for me. And so I'm not dragging my hand throughout and getting it all covered in graphite and, you know, everything like that. But it also just, you know, gives me a little bit more stability, especially as I'm starting to do these more refined kind of things. Okay, so from there, it's also make a few little adjustment thingies. Here and there. Now you can see once again, I'm still being pretty sketchy in how I'm applying my line right now. And here in a minute, I'm going to go through and I'm going to erase a lot of the excess lines. And then from there, I'll start to selectively darken some of them even more. So... want a very subtle curve at the bottom of the cap here. And I'm just going to put a few indicator marks there for this kind of texture that I see. Once again, I'll refine that here in just a few minutes as well. Okay, so from there, something like that. Okay, so from there, let's look at the neck of the spray bottle here. Now, in this case, there are some indents along this edge where we would have, you know, like finger holds and things. So we want to kind of indicate those as well. And right now I'm just doing basic angles once again, but I'm starting to refine it a little bit more. And so I can see one, two, basically three kind of major deals coming in there. Before we start to kind of round out at the bottom. All right, so from there, let's take our eraser. Make a few adjustments. Now, the other thing that you can probably see from, or hopefully you can see, is that I'm not just looking at my drawing, okay? I'm looking back and forth between my actual subject matter and my drawing quite a bit. And that's, once again, where seeing comes into play, because we don't want to just look at, you know, the object or the drawing. We want to look at them both so that we can see things that we might otherwise not be able to. If we were just trying to, like, say, draw this from memory or something, it would not necessarily be the same. So, now a lot of the subtlety in this kind of transparent bottle and whatnot is going to be hard to do based on just the actual like line work. A lot of it gets into the realm of shading as well. So that's something else to keep in mind, is that, you know, these things, sometimes it's not just all in the line work, it's also the shading and everything else that we see as well that can create some of these subtle effects. So right now I'm laying in where the bottle or the sprayer kind of is. And once again, we'll go in and refine some of that here as we selectively darken things in a minute. So from there, let's say, all right, now we can come in. Do something like that. Once again, I can erase my, harder edge lines or my angled lines that are kind of going off into the excess there somewhat, so we can get rid of some of them and start to kind of clean it up a little bit, if you will. All right, so from there, let's do, since the majority of the rest of what's inside this is a more ethereal line, so it's not as hard edge as like the outline, we're going to leave some of that alone for the time being as I refine the rest of this. But I do want to come in and add the label there because it is a hard edge line that we can really see. Really, we can see it well, I should say. Now, I do want to make one other kind of hard edge line, at least harder edge line here and there. And these are going to be some of the areas where the plastic is folding, but it's not necessarily, a cohesive line like the outline is. So the other thing I want to do is add where the label on the back side is reflecting through. Okay, so we've got pretty much the majority of our major line work, or at least the major outline work is going to be, okay? Now the other thing I want to do is I want to come in and I want to knock this guy back a little bit as well. And once again, we'll refine that a little bit more here in just a second. All right, so let's do our spray can next because it's a pretty easy element, but we do have these complicated kind of circular curves that we see as well. So what we're gonna do in this case, we're gonna kind of square the top of this off with the angles just so that we can make our curve here. And so once again, I tried to square this off somewhat, thinking about how it's recessing back into space like that. But now I put a kind of cross on that square, and now I'm going to kind of connect the dots there. Okay, so from there, do something like that. Now I can also tell that there is this kind of interesting thing happening, and that we kind of have a double edge created by shadows. And that's something else that we'll see come out more in the finishing line work here in a minute. Okay, now let's address the rim of the can here. So the rim's gonna follow the same basic curve as the top edge here, except that it's going to extend out over the edge somewhat, and it's also going to drop down somewhat there. Now if you'll excuse me real quick, I got to sharpen my pencil again. So I've got a little trash can that I keep here by my easel, so I can sharpen into the trash can and not make a big old mess. All right, so from this, now I can also see that my line is starting to get a little crooked in this too. So this is another nice thing about the maul stick, is I can kind of use this to almost like a straight edge. And I can make sure I've got nice straight lines there, because the line of the can is going to match up with the line of the cap. It's just that this kind of rim goes a little bit over the area as well. So in this case, I actually want to come outward a little. Make sure that everything's nice and straight. Okay, so from there, I'm going to draw all the way down to the top edge of the spray bottle. Now I'm going to have a little that goes behind it, but I don't want to make all of those marks. I am going to make a little bit of one in here, because it goes pretty much down to where the straw within the squirt bottle is, and we can see it. Now on this guy, I don't want to do the backside here because there's going to be stuff on the spray bottle that gets in the way of that. Now from there, I am going to also add a little bit of my detail here and there. And once again, I can use that to really straighten things out and what have you. So there I've got my basic, kind of can and everything, line work wise. And, obviously I could sit here for hours and hours and hours and really get into minute detail and everything like that. But for the purposes of this, that's not necessary. Now, I will tell you that, excuse me, the longer you spend on the drawing, the more accurate it's going to be. Once again, I can tell the difference between a drawing that has 60 hours of work in it versus a drawing that's got 10 minutes of work in it. And so, even this is a very basic drawing, and this is probably going to be at least an hour or two worth of work, comparatively speaking. So this is something to keep in mind, is that, this is something you should, take your time with, and, try to look at things, look at the things that you see, but also Oh, practice makes perfect, you know. I've been doing this, I've been drawing my entire life, but I've been, really actively pursuing it for about 22 years. Where, I'm actively trying to improve myself, and, I'm not just doing it for fun necessarily. I'm, actually trying to do something with it, et cetera, et cetera. So, once again, I started doing art, in a really serious kind of way when I was 11 years old. And, 22 years later, it's, you know, it kind of becomes second nature after a while. So normally, like a lot of the really formal things that I'm telling you guys about, at my point, I can do by just kind of eyeballing it. But using these angle sighting techniques, like I use the angle sighting, anytime I do anything basically. But the regular sighting where I'm making measurements, I can kind of eyeball most of that most of the time. Now I will use it to kind of sit there and refine some things here and there, but generally speaking, after a while, you get really, really good at seeing a lot of these things, and it becomes much easier, much less time consuming to do them. So that's something else to keep in mind. So, don't be dismayed right off the bat if you're not able to draw as well as I do. Because once again, I've got a lot more practice in this than you guys probably have. So, you too can be as good as me with the right amount of practice. Just something to keep in mind. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody here or with that statement by any means whatsoever. I want you guys to succeed, and I want you guys to be able to draw well, and draw any and everything that you want to, etc., etc. All right, so okay. The other thing. Straw there. Alrighty, getting pretty close to starting to do some real erasing and then kind of doing some finishing things on this line drawing. But once again, I'm just kind of going through and I'm looking back and forth, and I'm trying to, you know, trying to finesse and refine the line work that I see. Okay, so getting close, getting real close. Alrighty. Now, all right. And that. And that. And something like that. All right. Now let's look at bottle here. right, now I'm going to save this curve for last. All right, now what I want to do, I'm actually going to flip this guy over for just a second because it's going to make doing this curve a lot easier. Now, once again, I want to really, you should be doing this in the right, in the correct orientation so that you can see everything correctly and whatnot. But I pretty much know what it looks like, and in my case, doing flipping the orientation just makes it easier on me. Now that's something that, by all means, if, flipping it over helps you, get the right, kind of angle or what have you, by all means do it. There's nothing that says that you can't, and everything like that. It's just something that, we want to watch, how much we're doing it, because it can make us lose sight of the drawing at some point. Now, get my central kind of straw guy there. I'm also going to add a few things here and there. All right, now I'm going to sharpen my pencil one more time. So the other thing that you'll notice is that, the harder the graphite, like your 2B pencil, is going to stay sharp longer, versus your 4 and your 6B pencil are softer, so it's easier to wear them down more quickly. So you'll probably have to sharpen them more often, if you will. But it's not really an issue. It's just something to be aware of. Okay. All right, so now what I want to do is I'm actually going to flip this back over to do the little detail-y, kind of design on this bottle, because it's just going to make it easier to mimic the curves that I've already created in this orientation. So bear with me for a second. Now you can see that, I'm making these kind of light marks where I'm kind of, going back over the line multiple times instead of just sitting there making one solid mark. Now, I will do some of that, but I want to save that for the very, very end, okay? I don't necessarily want to start doing that way too soon. The other thing, even though I'm doing this on the side right now, I'm going to flip it back over and check everything before I move forward as well, just to make sure it looks accurate. I can see that I went a little too far inward this way, so that's what I wanted to check. So in that sense, what I want to do is just pull them back some. Pull them back this way some. In this case, I'm going a little bit darker at the moment just so that I can see where I'm pulling the back into. This will help me here in a minute when I start doing some erasing. And I'm going to call that good for the moment. That needs to cut in a lot. Alright, getting close, getting close. So then I can all right, so I've got a pretty good kind of start and go there. Now, the other thing I want to do is make a few indications of little light kind of thingies here and there. As well. Once again, these are just little detaily things that will help add to the overall drawing. And for the time being, you know, to start off with, once again, I want you guys to pay more attention to like your line work and whatnot. And then, you know, we'll get more into shading the further in that we go. Okay, so I think I've got my line work pretty well done. At least my general line work. So let's clean it up a little bit, and then we're going to selectively darken just a few places here and there, okay? So just going to kind of start cleaning things up just a bit. And you know, this isn't necessarily something that you have to do. You know, you could leave all the line work there if you wanted and just start shading it in, or you know, what have you. But it just depends on what you're going for, you know, really. But I feel like too that, you know, when you start to erase a lot of these kind of weird sketchy lines, that you begin to start to see everything more realistically as well. And it can also help you to see where, you know, things might need to be fixed or tweaked or changed here and there as well. You know, everything like that. So it's something that can be very advantageous for you as well. But you know, style plays a lot into this as well. So you know, it could be something that, you know, you're trying to go for a style that has that kind of messy quality. I've seen quite a few artists, you know, in my time and online and whatnot that do, you know, cool things where like the kind of messy line work starts to inform other parts of the drawing as well, or you know it's used as an aesthetic kind of thing to, you know, add, you know, emphasis or, you know, shading or detail or, you know, all kinds of different things. So, you know, there's a lot that you can do with that if you wanted to. um, that's you know, part of this, part of drawing in general, part of art making in general, is not only learning, you know, things that I have to teach you, but also coming up with, you know, things that work best for you yourself, because, you know, not everything that I do might be advantageous to the type of artwork that you are trying to create in your own personal practice, you know, and vice versa, you know. So that's something to keep in mind as well, is that, you know, there's really no right or wrong way to go about doing this. There are just ways that we can, you know, make it easier on ourselves, or, you know, things that we can do that will, you know, make our artwork more successful, if you will, or at least potentially more successful. All right. So, so once again, I'm gonna come back in here with my 6B pencil in a minute. I'm probably gonna use the 4B right off the bat, redefine a few lines, and then I'm gonna use the 6B to really kind of, you know, add emphasis to a few areas, to like deepen a few areas, and what have you. So it'll have kind of a 3D like effect, even though we're only using line work and we're not doing the full-blown shading or anything like that. So almost there. The other thing you'll notice is that the graphite tends to smudge quite a bit. So, you know, brushing your eraser dust off can smudge it some and what have you. But for this purpose, it's not really that big of a deal. You can also probably see how dark my eraser got. So this would also be a time, you know, where I can take my sandpaper guy over the trash can and I can start to clean it off some, and, you know, now I've got a more clean kind of thing to use, and once again I can go in and, you know, kind of clean up some things here and there. Alrighty, now I think we're pretty much ready to go with the actual darker bits. So I'm going to switch over to my 6B pencil now, and I'm going to go through and just kind of, you know, pick out a few things. I'm going to look for more like the shadow kind of areas to give them just a little bit more emphasis here and there, and everything like that. So for instance, you know, I noticed that you know, we got a little bit more of a darker line here and there. And once again, adding this just a little bit here and there of like darker marks. Can just add a little bit more emphasis around and what have you, and it can imply visual weight here and there, all of these kinds of things. So I'm gonna flip this over just for a second again. You know, be careful doing this. This is where having the extra clips on the end could be beneficial to you and everything like that. So now you can probably see I'm being less sketchy in my mark making and more solid in my mark making. The other thing I can do too is taper this off, so you know I can start much darker in one area and then loosen my pressure up as I move, and then make it less, you know, defined here and there. All right, so let's get back up to the top guy here. I'm sorry I'm not talking so much right now. I'm just trying to focus in on this. Anyway, now as I'm doing this, I really want to be very selective. I don't want to do everything in this way, okay? So, because if I did everything, then it's going to start to look like, you know, it's got a cartoon outline around it and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. Which, you know, if that's what we're going for, well, that's fine. But if we're going for realism, that might not be advantageous to us. All right. There's a good place here and there where we can taper the edge off. So it's darker up in that corner, for instance, than it is down here. And so I can make a darker mark at the top there. And what have you. All right, so let's also look at a few of these kinds of things. And I'm also want to this is also where I could add some little details and what have you. All right. Now, this guy's gonna have a lot more of a dark outline because he's situated against a dark background. I've got the black sheet up there, so I'm gonna be a little bit heavier in my outline here and there. Here's another good place where I can taper the line off. Now, let's also something like that. I'm also going to make a few indications here and there of where the different, kind of areas of the plastic are bending and folding and what have you. And a lot of these I'm just kind of doing by sight. All right, so just a few more here and there. I'm also going to pick that up, and you can already see that my pencil is pretty dull, so I'm going to go ahead and resharpen my pencil. And I'm going to come back up top here. Actually, I'm going to add one more guy there. And now we're going to look at the bottom spray bottle here. So you can probably also see I'm making much more, heavy, deliberate, singular marks based on the more sketchy lines that I have. Alrighty. Okay. Now, I already see I've made a few mistakes here and there. Skin, that's all right. There we go. Now, let's see. Once again, I'm just kind of trying to taper some of these darker marks off here and there, just to give it more visual weight, just in a couple places. Once again, don't be afraid to, if you mess up, it's okay. You can erase it and go again. Alrighty, almost done here. Okay. Now what I want to do is I'm going to actually start further down here. Okay. I'm going to leave that top line alone. And I'm going to flip over once again just to get these kind of guys. I'm going to sharpen my pencil one more time. Alrighty. And once again, I apologize for my silence. I'm just trying to focus on this in the moment so that we can really get a good sense for everything. flip my back over. Now let's also do a couple things here and there. And just a few lines here and there, just to give the idea that we are, you know, kind of in between and whatnot. Let's also add a few of these kind of darker, shadowy lines where we see the the reflections and whatnot coming across. Once again, that's something that we didn't necessarily have to do, but it just gives it a little bit more detail here and there and gives it more, you know, of a realistic kind of sense, if you will. Now, the other thing I could do is I could sit here and, you know, indicate where all of my shadows and things were and whatnot, as well as I could indicate, you know, where my surface is. And where things are kind of situated on that surface and what have you, and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. But, you know, even that's kind of messed that up. So I wasn't using my angle sighting. I was trying to eyeball it too much. Well, let's... So, aside from that, let's just do a few more little detail-y kinds of things. And these are all just kind of like the reflections on the label through the bottle and, you know, what have you. So I don't necessarily have to do these, but, you know, it's nice and it makes it look nice and gives it a little bit of detail and what have you. And that's pretty much it. That's how we go about doing this. So, you know, once again, we have very basic kinds of you know, shapes or, you know, objects here. And like, you know, I was really only focused on line work. And, you know, for our first several projects, that's what we're going to be focused more on is line work. But, you know, we can see that once again, by using siding, we can make a couple small tick marks here and there to define where the edges or boundaries of our shapes should be. And then from there, we can also make tick marks to kind of subdivide and create anchor points, off of which we would then know that, okay, well, something has to connect to that anchor point or roughly to it, et cetera, et cetera. And then from there, we can use the edge of our pencil to do angle sighting, make general angles, fill in the major shapes, and then we can start to finesse that line work. So once again, the key takeaways from this are: start lightly and work your way up to your darker marks, and start simply. Start with simple marks, simple angles, simple lines, and then we can gradually refine them into a more realistic kind of drawing. Okay, so once again, I cannot hammer this home enough: light to dark, simple to complex. Okay, so that's for any drawing. It doesn't matter what we're drawing. If we're drawing bottles like this, if we're drawing a human being, if we're drawing a dog, a cat, it doesn't matter. Whatever we are drawing, we can use this method that I've just shown you to draw it accurately, but we also want to go from light to dark and from simple to complex. Okay, I cannot stress it enough. But if you do it like this, if you start simply with simple shapes, simple lines, simple angles, work your way from light to dark and from simple to complex, it's pretty easy to make a very accurate drawing from this. So hopefully you can kind of see between the two, and everything like that. But once again, this is what I want you guys to do, in terms of actually drawing out your objects and things. Once again, you can use the same method for literally every single drawing you ever do. It doesn't matter what we're drawing. We just want to start with, once again, define our boundaries, then start making simple shapes with angle and line, and then start to refine it. Okay. Once again, I can't stress it enough. But if you do these things, you'll be successful. It might take you a little bit of practice. Once again, I did not become good overnight. So take your time with it. Don't get frustrated. If you have any questions at all, let me know, and I'll be happy to help you out, and everything like that. But you can reference this video at any time. Once again, I recommend that all of your drawings start out in this way. And in a later video we'll talk more about actually shading and everything like that. So in that case, we might not want to go through and do darker lines here and there, but hopefully in this case it allows you to see it better on the video and everything like that. But once again, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.